Hey everybody, welcome back to the Withstand podcast and our latest episode dedicated to the book of Acts. I pray that you're keeping well and that today's episode provides you with a timely break from all the madness that is ensuing around us in this crazy world that we find ourselves in. Now, in our last episode, we read through the first part of chapter 19 in the book of Acts. Today, we'll read the balance, starting with verse 23 and, of course, reading through to the end. This is God's word. And about that time there arose a great commotion about the way. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying they are not gods, which are made with hands. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. So the whole city was filled with confusion, and rushed into the theatre with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions. And when Paul wanted to go in, the disciples, would not allow him. Then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent to him, pleading that he would not venture into the theatre. Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander motioned with his hand, and wanted to make his defence to the people. When they found out that he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. And when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana, and of the image which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of your goddess. Therefore, if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you have any other inquiry to make, it shall be determined in the lawful assembly. For we are in danger of being called in question for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering. And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. This is the word of the Lord. Well, didn't that escalate quickly, hey? So this is what Tom Constable writes about the riot in Ephesus. This incident increases our understanding about the effects of the gospel on Ephesian society and religion. Luke probably included it in order to help his readers appreciate what can happen when the gospel is proclaimed so that we can be prepared for it. Another reason for including it is that it has an apologetic value. Luke's purpose in presenting this vignette is clearly apologetic, in line with his argument for the religio licita status of Christianity, and in anticipation of the theme stressed in Paul's speeches of defence. Politically, Luke's report of the friendliness of the Asiarchs, officials of the province, toward Paul and the city clerk's intervention on his behalf, is the best defence imaginable against the charge that Paul and Christianity threaten the official life of the empire. Christianity, the way, had such an influence in Ephesian society that the local pagan worship suffered. Cassidy has rightly pointed out that the use of the phrase the way identifies the disciples as constituting a socially cohesive movement, a movement arising out of and grounded in their shared faith in Jesus. What is interesting about Luke's use of this terminology is that we find it chiefly in connection with the church in Jerusalem and its environs, and within the church in Ephesus and its environs. This emphasizes that the movement is heading west, is translocal, and can incarnate itself both at the heart of Jewish culture and at the heart of the somewhat Romanized Hellenistic culture found in Ephesus. The major disturbance that Luke proceeded to record was not opposition to Paul personally, It was a reaction to the effect of the gospel in Ephesus. This is the major unit in Acts, showing how the transformation of a community affects the culture at large, making it so nervous that it reacts to stop the progress of the gospel. There were at least 2 goddesses named Artemis that Gentiles worshipped in the Roman Empire at this time. One Artemis, called Diana by the Romans, was a goddess of the hunt, and she was often pictured as a young woman carrying a hunting bow. The other, Artemis of the Ephesians, was a celibate goddess portrayed as a woman adorned with many ornaments. She was not a fertility goddess, but a goddess who aided women in childbirth. The worship of Diana of the Ephesians was entirely Asian and not Greek, although the Greek colonists attempted to establish an identification with their own Artemis on account of certain analogies between them. There were at least 33 other places of Artemis worship in the ancient world, but the temple in Ephesus was the chief worship center of Artemis of the Ephesians. Pausanias, who wrote in the middle of the 2nd century AD, claimed that the Ephesian Artemis cult was the most widely followed one in the ancient world. The Temple of Artemis in Ephesus was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and many historians believe that it was one of the most beautiful buildings ever built. It stood on the side of Mount Pion, about a mile northeast of the city, and served as a bank as well as a place of worship and cultic immorality. Goodness, kind of sounds a bit like Southland. It could accommodate about 25,000 people, and it was probably the largest Greek temple ever built. The temple was 425 feet in length and 220 in breadth, and the columns were 60 feet high. The number of columns was 127, each of them the gift of a king, and 36 of them were enriched with ornament and colour. The folding doors were of cypress wood. The part which was not open to the sky was roofed over with cedar, and the staircase was formed of wood of one single vine from the island of Cyprus. The value and fame of the temple were enhanced by its being the treasury, where a large portion of the wealth of Western Asia was stored up. It is probable that there was no religious building in the world in which was concentrated a greater amount of admiration, enthusiasm, and superstition. This temple's centerpiece was an object that resembled a woman. Other objects that had purportedly fallen from heaven, that also became sacred cult objects, were at Troy, Pessinus, Enna, and Emmaus. The figure which assumed this emblematic form above was terminated below in a shapeless block. The material was wood. A bar of metal was in each hand. The dress was covered with mystic devices, and the small shrine where it stood within the temple was concealed by a curtain in front. Yet rude as the image was, it was the object of the utmost veneration. The silversmiths in Ephesus took Artemis as their patron deity, and among their other wares made miniature silver shrines containing images of the goddess that they sold to devotees of the goddess. As Christianity spread as a result of Paul's ministry in Ephesus, interest in Artemis and the market for her statuettes declined. The leader of the guild that made these trinkets was a man named Demetrius. When pilgrims came to Ephesus, they liked to take a souvenir home. These silversmiths were makers of little silver model shrines, which were bought and sold as souvenirs. Additionally, worshippers may have presented these model shrines as votive offerings when they visited the temple, as some people today purchase candles that they proceed to light and leave in churches. Demetrius's words established the extent to which the gospel had penetrated the province of Asia and the effect it had. There is no stronger testimony than the words of a critic who acknowledges the success of his adversary. Obviously, financial loss motivated Demetrius to organize his protest as much as, or perhaps even more than, veneration for the goddess Artemis. Artemis was known as a major supporter of chastity, being a virgin goddess. Vested interests were disguised as local patriotism, in this case also under the cloak of religious zeal. In an honour-shame culture such as this one, public humiliation or being seen as merely mercenary individuals could ruin reputations and so one's livelihood. The guilds and the problem they presented to the non-conforming Christian haunt the background of the New Testament. They were societies, not trade unions, primarily social and multitudinous in ancient society. Records exist of guilds of bankers, doctors, architects, producers of woolen and linen goods, dyers, workers in metal, stone or clay, builders, carpenters, pastry cooks, barbers, embalmers, and transport workers. The only other protest by Gentiles against the gospel that Luke recorded in Acts also resulted from financial loss. The profit motive still opposes the spread of the gospel. You cannot step on a man's pocketbook without hearing him say, ouch. The temple of Artemis was a source of civic pride to the Ephesians. In view of Ephesus's general commercial decline in recent years, as explained above, it is easy to see how the silversmiths' protests could have so quickly aroused popular opposition to the Christian missionaries. This was a case of mob violence. Many of the protesters did not understand what the issue was. A major boulevard in Ephesus, the Arcadian Way, ran from the harbour to the Great Theatre, and it was probably this artery that the ringleaders used to collect citizens on their march to the outdoor theatre. Archaeologists have restored part of the Arcadian Way and the Great Theatre at Ephesus. This theatre, the largest one in Asia Minor and in the ancient Greek world, lay on the side of Mount Pion, facing the town, and seated approximately 21,500 people. Its semi-circular design was typical of Roman outdoor theatres. Gaius was a common Greek name. This Gaius seems to have been different from the man or the men with the same name mentioned in chapter 20, Romans 16 and 1 Corinthians 1, since this Gaius was a Macedonian. Some Greek manuscripts, however, indicate that it was only Aristarchus who was a Macedonian, in which this Gaius may have been the resident of Derbe mentioned in chapter 20. Aristarchus does appear later in Acts. He came from Thessalonica. Evidently, the silversmiths did not lay hands on Paul as they did on Gaius and Aristarchus. He seems to have been elsewhere in Ephesus when this demonstration broke out. Paul apparently desired to use this occasion to preach the gospel to the assembled throng in the theatre. However, the other Christians sensed his danger and would not allow him to make himself a target of their violence. The Asiarchs were educated citizens who were the political leaders of the cities of this Roman province. They were men of substance and influence in the cities of the province of Asia, who were or had been presidents of the provincial council, which dealt principally with organising the games and with ceremonial matters connected with emperor worship. During his term of office, the Asiarch was styled high priest of the imperial cult. Some of these men were friends of Paul. This shows again that the attitude of many leaders was friendly to Christianity at this time. Their attitude doubtless reflected what was appropriate in the empire. The Asiarchs too wanted to prevent Paul from being injured. A sect whose leader had Asiarchs for friends cannot be dangerous to the state. Notice that Paul had made friends with leading men of the city. He did not keep a low profile as he evangelized. We should probably understand Luke's reference to the confusion of the crowd as pertaining to the particular grievance of the silversmiths. Most of the people did not understand the reason for the gathering. They apparently just went along for the excitement. The Greek word translated assembly is ecclesia, the normal translation of which is church. This use illustrates the basic meaning of the word church, which is an assembly of people called out of the mass for a special purpose. In this case, the special purpose of the assembly was to protest Paul's preaching. The crowd's reaction to Alexander showed distinct hostility toward him. Apparently, Alexander was a leading unbelieving Jew who wanted the crowd to understand that even though Paul was a Jew, the local Jewish community did not approve of him. However, like Gallio in Corinth, this crowd did not distinguish between Christianity and Judaism. Both faiths stood against idolatry. Perhaps the crowd assumed that Alexander wanted to defend Paul as a fellow Jew. This Alexander may be the one Paul warned Timothy about, but he may have been someone else, since Alexander was a common name among both Jews and Gentiles. The town clerk was the equivalent of a modern mayor, the locally elected executive official most responsible for what took place in the city. He was the keeper of the archives and public reader of decrees in the assemblies. Consequently, he was eager to end this demonstration. He made 4 points in his address to the assembly. First, there was no danger whatsoever that people would conclude that Artemis was a goddess made by hands, since everyone knew that the image of her in her famous temple had fallen down from the sky. Do nothing rash is still good advice. There is no reason to believe that the town clerk was a Christian, but he was a wise and diplomatic man. The title guardian of the temple was an honour that Rome bestowed on selected cities that possessed temples of the imperial cult. Ephesus was one of these. Second, Gaius and Aristarchus had done nothing worthy of punishment. They had neither stolen anything out of the temple, nor had they blasphemed Artemis. Robbing temples and blaspheming other gods were common accusations that Gentiles made against Jews, including Jewish Christians, in antiquity. Demetrius had charged Paul with saying the gods made by hands are not gods at all, but he had not, apparently, specifically blasphemed Artemis by saying things about her that were untrue. Third, if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen had a complaint against anyone, they should handle it in the legally authorized way and take their adversaries to the courts. The court that would have dealt with this kind of complaint met 3 times a month in Ephesus. Proconsuls were the provincial governors. Fourth, the town clerk reminded the citizens that if the provincial authorities discovered that there was no good reason for their rioting, they could impose penalties on the city. He acknowledged that the riot was unjustified. This line of argument proved effective, so the crowd, or the ecclesia, dispersed. This may have been the occasion when Priscilla and Aquila risked their lives for Paul. This event may also have been in Paul's mind when he wrote of fighting wild beasts at Ephesus, and of despairing of life as he faced a deadly foe. One wonders if the cooling of the Ephesian Christians' love for Jesus Christ, which took place in later years, connects to the zeal for Artemis that characterized this community. The story of the riot in Ephesus is in effect a statement that Christians do not constitute a danger to the state and a plea that they be treated with toleration in a pluralistic society. Only when properly defined criminal charges can be preferred against them should they be summoned before the courts. And as always, guys, I'll leave a link to these in the show notes for you. Now, obviously, we learn a little bit more about some of the paganism and occult practices that the people in Ephesus were practicing at the time. So today's daily devotion is appropriately titled A Christ-Centered Life, which of course is what each and every one of them needed to live at that time. And it's based on Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. To me, living means living for Christ. And Dr. Stanley writes, when the Lord doesn't answer your prayers in the way you hope, do you accept His will? Or do you get angry, doubt Him, and question His character? When circumstances turn negative, do you immediately accuse Him of being unloving? Or do you voice your trust that your sovereign, wise, and loving God has allowed the adversity for a purpose, for your good and His glory? The reason for these questions is to ascertain if there is any self-centeredness in your life, to determine whether you're more concerned with your wishes and goals than you are with God's will. If so, do not be surprised or discouraged. This is part of the sin nature the Father is purging from your life. He wants you to trust Him fully, with absolute faith, that He provides the absolute best for you regardless of what happens. And His ultimate goal is to bring you to the point of saying, what God wills is what I want. What pleases Him is what I desire. Because for me, to live means exalting Christ who saved me. And he prays, Jesus, thank you for saving me and cleansing me of self-centeredness. Help me live in a manner that reflects you and your desires. Amen. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. That devotion concludes our study for today, and I pray that it was a blessing to you. Until next time, I'm going to pray for each and every one of you. God bless you. Take care. Maranatha.